Ministers have invited rail unions to talks on Monday, but 7 months into this dispute, there's still no resolution. One explanation for the impasse is that since COVID, the financial incentives to do a deal have fundamentally shifted. This chart shows passenger journeys by quarter going back to 2019. And in the year before COVID, there were 1.7 billion journeys on the railways. That figure collapsed in 2020. And while there's been a recovery, they're still down around a third, which means fare revenues have collapsed too. Pre-COVID revenue, which is the red bars here, was a fairly stable £12 billion, much higher than the government's subsidy in blue. But income plummeted in 2020 and subsidies rose to keep the wheels turning from around £7 billion to more than £17 billion at a peak. And that's why the industry says it can't afford inflation-matching pay rises. But an equally important change is what happens to that revenue. Under the old franchise system, fares went from passengers to train operators. They guaranteed revenue to government. The train operators negotiated directly with the unions on pay, and if Network Rail staff went on strike, they paid the train companies compensation for lost fares, around £25 million a day. That meant all sides had an incentive to settle disputes. If the cost of a pay demand was less than the cost of strike action, train operators and Network Rail were incentivised to do a deal. But COVID ended that system. Today, passenger fares go directly to the Department of Transport, which then pays the train operators to run the service. But in the event of strikes, the train operators are still getting paid. The RMT say that's cost taxpayers £340 million so far. But crucially, it's reduced the incentive for a deal, as all the risk, all the cost now lies with the government and the taxpayer. Now, the unions know this, but they have a calculation of their own to make. Every day's strike action is costing members pay. RMT members are down 19 days in 7 months, with 4 days coming out of each of their December and January pay packets. That is a big hit in a cost of living crisis. So this dispute may ultimately come down to who has the greater appetite for financial pain. Government playing with taxpayers' money, or striking workers sacrificing their own.